Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we are going to start Unit 1, Realist and Non-Realist Approaches. And our topic is some important theories in the realist approach to international relations. As you might have perhaps already noticed, we have been making oblique reference to some of the important realist theories like conflict, balance of power, and deference in the discussion above. We shall now focus more specifically on these to help us develop a better understanding of the realist approach to the study of international politics. First of all, let us discuss theory of conflict. Conflict constitutes the core of the realist approach. It is around this basic reality of perpetual conflict among the states in the international system that the entire realist theory is built. If you recall the main argument of the realist, you would be able to recognize the central importance they attach to human nature, which according to them is essentially conflicting. This inherently conflicting nature of human beings, according to the realist, leads to a constant struggle for power among them. Following from this, the nature of international system is struggle for power among them, viewed by the realist as anarchic and as one that is based on the principle of self-help. In self-help system, the realists argue it would be native on the part of the state to rely upon others for securing its own security. In other words, the structure of the international system, which is marked by perpetual conflict and perennial condition of uncertainty in the absence of a central authority, has no space for friendship, trust, and honor. Critiquing idealist belief in internationalism and natural harmony, the realists posit that in the absence of any higher authority over and above the sovereign state, international politics is conducted in a state of nature like situation and is thus characterized by anarchy, not harmony. Unlike domestic politics, where a hierarchical pattern of authority exists to enforce private agreements and public laws, there is no such arrangement in the international politics, where all sovereign states enjoy formal equality against each other. As a result, an anarchic international system in the realist perspective is viewed as one in which each state is forced to help itself and give priority to its own national interest, defined most fundamentally as state survival and territorial defense. The issue of national interest, understood in terms of state survival, leads to a constant struggle for power among the states, as is evident from Hans Morgenthau's classical statement in Politics Among Nations, the struggle for power and peace. That statement think and act in terms of interest defined as power. Power here broadly understood in terms of both material and psychological, military and economic capabilities. The centrality of the notion of power in the realist perspective is includable linked to the concept of national interest that is defined in terms of maximizing power. This explains why realists put so much of emphasis on the role of power and views the nature of world politics as inherently conflictual in nature. The realists argue that such power exists only in a relative sense and that all countries cannot maximize their power or satisfy their national interest at the same time. A constant struggle for power and more power among the states characterizes the nature of the world politics. However, the pursuit of power or constant struggle for power among the states does not mean that the international system is characterized by relentless conflict and unending war. Anarchy, not in the Hobbesian sense of a state of nature, in which absence of norms and conventions, rules, and laws had created a free for all situation, but anarchy in a limited sense of the term, that is, the absence of an recognizable supreme authority in the international system over and above the state. In fact, the realists argue that the some sense semi-balance of order is maintained within the state system through a creation of a balance of power. This brings us to another important theory of realist approach, that is power balance of power, and we shall discuss this in our next section. The next section is theory of balance of power. Given the anarchic nature of the international system, owing to absence of any higher authority to prevent and counter use of force, the realists argue that the security can only be realized through self-help. As Waltz notes, in an anarchic structure, self-help is necessarily the principle of action. However, when a particular state seeks to ensure its own security by acquiring weapons and other means, it invariably fuels the insecurity of other states. The spiral of insecurity thus unleashed is called security dilemma. According to Wheeler and Booth, security dilemma exists when the military preparations of one state create an unreasonable uncertainty in the mind of another as to whether these preparations are for defensive purpose only to enhance its security to an uncertain world, or whether they are offensive purposes to change the status quo of its advantage. This leads to a situation whereby one state's quest for security often becomes another state's source of insecurity. In other words, the states find it extremely difficult to trust one another and often suspect the intentions of others. As a result, the military preparations of one state are to be invariably matched by neighboring states. Ironically, at the end of the day, states often feel no more secure than before. They undertook measures to enhance their own security. It is with a view to escape this security dilemma that the theory of balance of power becomes important. However, the realists are not unanimous on this. While the neo-realists view the security dilemma to be a perennial condition of international politics, the classical realists believe that even in a self-help system, the dilemma can be mitigated. The balance of power thus becomes the principal mechanism by which the security dilemma is mitigated. But what is meant by balance of power? Balance of power is all about fashioning a pattern of interaction among states that tend to curb aggression and expansionism by rendering them impracticable. This means that while pursuing their national interest and national security, states do enter into alliances which, when properly balanced against one another, may guarantee prolonged periods of peace and stability. However, given the highly dynamic and volatile nature of international system, it is virtually impossible to predict how long would such peace and stability last. Moreover, each time the balance of power breaks down, it is inevitably followed by a war. The non-realist or structural realist argue that in a self-help system, the balance of power can emerge even in the absence of a conscious policy to maintain the balance, that is, without pursuing a policy of prudent statecraft, as Waltz argues that the balances of power inevitably emerge irrespective of the intentions of any state. In an anarchical system in which states always seek to perpetuate themselves, alliances will inevitably emerge that seek to check and balance the power against threatening states. However, all varieties of realism are united in the belief that the balance of power is not a stable condition. Whether it was contrived balance of the concrete of Europe in the early 19th century or more fortuitous balance of the Cold War, such balances eventually broke down. The precipitating factor for the breakdown of such a balance of power could either be a war or peaceful change. However, the realists argue that a new balance of power soon replaced the old one. The continual collapsing of balance of power in the international system demonstrates that states can only mitigate the worst consequences of the security dilemma but cannot escape it altogether. The realists attribute the reason for the existence of such conditions to the absence of trust in the international system. The next theory is the theory of deterrence. The theory of deterrence is a new name for balance of power in the modern nuclear age, also known as the nuclear diplomacy. It came into existence during the period of Cold War diplomacy. The term Cold War diplomacy refers to some very specific aspects of diplomacy that emerged after Second World War. From the late 1940s until the end of the 1980s, world politics was dominated by the ideological confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. Each superpower, supported by a network of allies, sought to undermine the defeat the other by all means short of a real or a hot war. Hence, the Cold War description of this confrontational system. The diplomatic activity associated with the East West confrontation had a single dramatic focus: the absolute necessity of avoiding a global nuclear conflict that could destroy the international system. It was against this backdrop that nuclear diplomacy, or the deterrence theory, came to the force as one of the most important types of Cold War diplomacy. But what is meant by nuclear diplomacy or deterrence theory? Nuclear diplomacy refers to the interaction between the states that possess nuclear weapons, where one or more states threaten to use them to dissuade an opponent from undertaking in an action. In other words, the theory of deterrence is based on the assumption that in a nuclear age, possession of nuclear weapons by one state or one bloc of states would deter the enemy state or the enemy camp from making first use of nuclear option in the course of a likely war. Now, at the end of the unit, let us have summary about the unit. In this final section of the unit, let us try and sum up the main argument of realist approach to the study of international politics. As a school of thought, realism continues to provide one of the most influential frameworks to understand the nature of world politics. The realist approach views nation states as the principal actors in world politics, as they are answerable to no higher political authority in the international system. In other words, states are treated as the superordinate actors on the world stage. Moreover, conflicts of interest among them in an anarchical international system are assumed to be inevitable. The purpose of statecraft in the realist framework is national survival in a hostile environment. No means is considered to be more important to secure national survival than the acquisition of power, and no practical is more important than self help. The ultimate dependence of the state on its own resources to promote its interest and protect itself. As aptly noted by Charlie W. Kigley Jr., the game of the international politics takes place under conditions of permanent anarchy and revolves around the pursuit of power, acquiring it, increasing it, protecting it, and using it to bend others to one's will. Here we want to wind up today's lecture, and we have come to the end of the unit. Thank you so much for your attention.